Welcome. My name is Tahit Chappelle, pronouns he, him. I'm the executive director of the New Jersey Department of State's Cannabis Training Academy. We are the state's no cost technical assistance program aimed at helping you understand the cannabis licensing application process and to gain a deeper understanding and insight on the cannabis industry inside of the Garden State. If you are interested in the cannabis industry or have been thinking of pursuing a license or joining the industry in some way, shape, or form, whether that's joining as a person in the workforce development or as an ancillary service provider, please learn more about us at CTA.NJ.GOV, or you can always contact us at CTA@SOS.NJ.GOV, and we will work to get back to you within business hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And I'm going to drop that in the Zoom chat so that all of our participants have that. Listen, if you are tuning in, we have a fun, very exciting, dare I say, a long digesting conversation we're about to have with the Alexis Garrison, who is not only a chef. Let me put respect to your name, Alexis, Chef Alexis Garrison, who is manager and owner of Canna Haute.
You got it. You got it. You got it, my friend. You got it. The Haute.
Today's webinar description is processing and manufacturing presents opportunities to create high quality cannabis products that meet safety standards for both consumer and patients. If you're interested in producing items such as edibles, hash, or other cannabis infused products for retail distribution, this conversation is going to be many valuable insights here. So we're going to learn from a seasoned legacy operator who successfully transitioned her baked goods from private delivery services to the shelves of numerous licensed dispensaries. So again, before we begin, if there are questions that you hear or come up and percolate while we are talking, please ask your questions in the Q&A box or drop your questions in the Zoom chat and we will try to get to them by the end of this conversation. We have some prepared remarks. If you have been part of our Legacy to Legal webinar series, you know we have some prepared remarks first, we'll have prepared questions, and then we'll get into the audience Q&A. So with that being said, Chef Alexis, we're going to pass it to you. Can you please introduce yourself and let the people know who you are?
Hello, guys. Thank you guys for having me. My name's Chef Alexis Garrison. I have been in this space from a legacy space since 2009, 2010, and transferred over to the adult rec space in 2000 and let's see. On the early medical side in Seattle, it was so we'll say 2010 on that side, but just like on the East Coast since 2021. And man, it's been an incredible journey. I'm a chef, I'm a foodie at heart. I put food first, and that's kind of my approach to all things that I create and create for other people that are ingestible. It is a it is like a way of feeding the soul, the same way I look at food and how it builds community and just in food ways in general. So it embodies a plethora of things. My approach and that's like just how I look at life and how I live life is the same way that I kind of approach my manufacturing and all of the goods that I like that I create and create for other people and myself included. I'm a West Coast girl. They
They
from
say the West
Seattle.
Coast is best coast, but the East Coast is the beast coast. So,
They do. But I'd always been partial from I'm from Seattle. I grew up in a little smaller suburb of Seattle called Kent. And I spent my summers in New York City. And it was like, I was always like, I'm going to move to New York and work in the music industry. And that's what brought me to the East Coast initially. And then cannabis has just been another addition to my journey and my story. So yeah.
Listen, Alexis, in our conversations that we've had, you've had a storied career even before you became a chef. But, for the purpose of this conversation, before we talk about edibles and talk about getting your edible products to shelves, can you talk about what made you want to become a chef in the first place and what made you realize that what you put in your body is very important for your health and wellness? Can we talk a little bit about what got you to the chef portion of Chef Alexis Garrison?
I believe, I think it was like an integral part of just my childhood and my upbringing. My father grew up on farms and growing vegetables, and my mother grew up in the Air Force, and I feel like they had a huge part in forming like how I looked at food, my brother and myself. And with that being said, it's just like I look at it, all the it's an ingredient. This plant is, and it's medicine. It's ways. There's like we have all these different approaches, and I guess each product that you look at has these different aesthetics. It could be something that's for a novice, and then it could be something that's this other thing. And so, yeah, I feel like it's just been a part of my upbringing. Food is just it's always an event around food. And I think that's just culturally, that's where we commune, that's where we break bread. And so I got to see a lot of money get spent in the industry around food, and got to see the celebration of what that looks like. I've got the chance to work with some of the greatest chefs in the country, um, whom are my peers. And I think like I said, I feel like everything kind of revolves around that. Like I take hours to figure out where we're gonna eat. It's like, oh, I can't eat the same place twice, or if I can't get a reservation here, it's everything's just very intentional. And so, when you take that approach, you're able, like, it's hard to scale at first, and you got to take all of these things into consideration. Like,
Absolutely. And we'll get into that in just a second. And for those that are tuning in, level two, the history of cannabis prohibition and cannabis legalization. We'll talk about the medicinal aspects of cannabis and how the education and information around the medicinal therapeutic and benefits of this medicinal plant helped usher and shepherd in what we now see as adult use legalization. So I'm glad they brought up the medicinal aspects of it, because without the medicinal aspects of this plant being recognized and promoted and educated, we technically may not even be where we are now with a little bit of a more open market, so to speak. And I have not met anyone who is very, against food or eating in general too. So food definitely does bring people together. So that's definitely a nice little place to be. So before we get deeper into the entrepreneur and business side, can you just give the audience just a background explainer based on your experience and what you know? How would you describe edibles? How are they made and how do they exactly work? Can we start with just a primer of what edibles are for maybe the novices?
I would say an edible is like a food or beverage that's ingestible through your bloodstream, and it has THC or CBD that kind of has a longer onset time than as if you were to smoke or vape. The way it metabolizes in your liver takes on a certain a time frame based off of how your body receives cannabis, and it then turns into this kind of like a psychoactive effect, where it might be more sedating than it is uplifting. But yeah, we have the ability to kind of control that now. So that's
And I'm sure it takes some trial and error to find your sweet spot. But that's the fun part of your job, I'm sure, is to try to figure out that before you give it to consumers. So let's talk about you're a chef. You make infused products. Can you talk about what is your experience as potentially a edible consumer versus being a chef who infuses and creates infused edible products? What is the difference in experience being on the consumer side versus the producer side, so to speak? Can you talk about that?
consumer side. I guess in experiencing early moments, it's always they were mostly like a lot of edibles were inconsistent, I guess. Um, as someone that is creating things, it's about having that a consistent experience. Um, and it's hard to it's kind of hard to create in your interim moments of trying to figure out what works, understanding, how it works with fats and your bioavailability and just kind of getting a better understanding of the plant. I feel like most people have a challenge in that moment in the beginning. It is dosing, understanding your limitations, or, or if you have a higher tolerance, it's really understanding yourself and your body and like what limits you can take. And I feel like as someone that came from a legacy space, there was a lot of us in the early moments that, yeah, we didn't understand dosing, and having an appreciation for that is like, it's incredible. And come a long way because you do a lot of research. And like, so programs like this, if they had existed when I was looking for ways to help understand how to get my products that I was making for delivery services or whatever to kind of to have that consistency and to not be overdosed or underdosed, and to, yeah, deliver a similar experience like every single time. So I think that was something that was an interesting transition, I guess, to put that into play and like to actually have to do a lot of R&D to get to a finished product. It's like you can bring an idea, you have an idea, but bringing it to fruition is not the easiest thing.
That's a
So,
whole different journey that a lot of people learn in various aspects. And we're going to talk about understanding dosing, consistency, creating a product that is consistent to consumer. So we're going to get to that in a second. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Let's stay to let's stick for now between the consumer and the producer experience.
mhm.
Can you discuss the difference in the information a consumer should have in consuming an edible versus what information a producer should have when creating an edible product? So for listeners, Alexis, what should people know if they're thinking, hey, I'm going to go into a dispensary and buy gummy versus I'm the manufacturer producer, I got to make these gummies. Can we talk about what's the difference of information that is needed for both sides?
I guess as a consumer, like if you're a distillate, depending, I guess, is it a distillate base? Is it a rosin base? Is it a solvent base? And also just like, I think it's the same thing, the same way you would as a consumer go to a grocery store, you're reading the ingredients of the back of your products. And if you do that, I feel like as an educated consumer, that is something that I do at the grocery store. That is something that I do. It's like something I do naturally. As a producer, it's understanding margins and of certain of certain things. It's understanding um I guess getting, I guess it's understanding yields, it's understanding how to homogenize and make something consistent and having a consistent product where you're not having batches that are showing variabilities, I guess. And yeah, I think that's the hardest part. And then, you know, um, the precision part of it. Uh, it's not just, hey, I'm putting a little cannabis in this. It's like all very precise and calculated, and understanding the cost of everything. I think it's a lot more, yeah. But understanding as a consumer, like, hey, understand what you're paying for. And I think um that's part of a brand's job, but it's also just kind of doing your due diligence on like, where do these brands align with who you are, and like who you are as a person and as a consumer. And I feel like there's a lot of brands that don't do that, and there's a lot of brands that are very intentional about that. And it's there's something for everybody,
Oh,
right?
we can talk hours about the conscious consumer, and someone who worked for the second dispensary that opened up in Philadelphia, being a bud tender and working in medical marijuana specific
Mm,
state, a lot of patients were very new to edibles, and they would laugh about their brownies, they would laugh about their cookies, but they were getting a regulated product that was dosed and was supposed to be dosed and administered in very different ways and was supposed to be consistent. And so we really, really pushed the education for consumers so that they knew, like you said, what are you getting? You know what you're getting, and do you understand what you're getting? Do you understand reading the label? Do you understand the ingredients? Do you know how that's going to impact you, not just your body, but other medications that you might be taking too? So I'm glad that you brought that up because one thing that we really emphasized in our dispensary in Philly was the educated patient, the educated consumer is the best type of consumer because they know what they're looking for and they know exactly the type of medicine or product that they're looking for to
yeah.
address their needs or alleviate their needs. So we're going to get back to, you mentioned some really good words about dosing and consistency and yield and margins. We're going to get to that in a second. So Chef Garrison, when you were thinking about transitioning from legacy or just getting into the regulated market, uh, were you always bent on, hey, I'm gonna make an edible product and get that onto shelves? Were you just thinking generally like, how can I get it into the cannabis, into the regulated cannabis industry? Or if you were like, hey, I'm gonna use my skills as a chef and make edible infused products, can you just talk to us about creating something from concept and getting that into reality and more so figuring out, okay, I want to get an edible product and I want to bring that to the masses or offer that in a regulated market. How did you get that onto shelves? What was that process like? Can you take us through that kind of like from concept to reality process for us?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a it was like a lot of it's a process of elimination. It was figuring out shelf like what had shelf life. It's determining all of these things because, you know, you're bringing a product to market that no one's necessarily familiar with. Your turnover is, you're expecting certain sales, but it's a gradual growth. Um, Being able to forecast things and having the ability to pivot. Um, but I feel like it was really looking into the ingredients of products and doing shelf life tests. And I feel like there was moments where I surprised myself. And I felt like I was challenged by there was challenges, and that's where I excelled. But then there was things that I was like, oh, I'm tired of making like gummies, let's just say. All right, let's just use that for example. It was great. Like it was at first, I started from a flood and scrape, right? Very, and I wasn't into this flood and scrape method. I was using a funnel because I didn't like the inconsistencies of a flood and scrape. Um, so it's just like understanding the ingredients, understanding if this product has an audience and a consumer, um, and being able to be able to do performers and these things and understanding, is this just something I'm throwing at the wall to see if is it gonna stick, or is there a market? Is there a use for this product? And I feel like that's where I used to see everyone starting with gummies. Has a long shelf life, right? And it's a very easy entry way as far as edibles into the market. But once you start making little niche items or artisanal products, like I did macarons, um, a little 5 pack of macarons. This is in Massachusetts.
I never seen that here. Hold up. Wow.
Yeah, it was a brand called Munchies. And it had challenges, a lot of challenges before it reached the market. And they were a seasonal item because of shelf life. I didn't want to put anything on the market that I was like, we have to have these frozen or they need to be refrigerated. Um, so you're like, all right, I have a limited time. So it's just like understanding your rollout. How much time is it taking to produce things? What is the shelf like? Honey sticks. That was another product. Like finding local honey in the area that the facility was in and doing things like that that were very artisanal that you knew that locals would it would drive people of the community like, oh, this honey is from was it North Brookfield or wherever it was, Charlton, wherever it was. And people get excited about stuff like that. So it's just like, and that was a very easy, that was like a one process type of moment. Popping candy or pop rocks is something else that I brought to market. And it was like, from idea to shelf, it was probably, I want to say like a 8-week process, which was very quick for me. Um, but it was like I said, that was one of those things. It was a challenge. It was was it 3 ingredients and then understanding how to dose it. And I think that's what took longer than anything else. But simplifying processes and being able to eliminate ingredients that will cause your product to spoil. Your shelf life is your best friend. And so that's why I feel like you see everyone starting with a gummy, a hard candy, like stuff that isn't perishable fast. But I'm a queen of savory, and that's what I that's what I believe in. And um, so it's finding that balance, and there's something for everybody. So
Now, Chef, let's talk about just access to technology. Were you doing this shelf life testing, R&D process in your home, like kitchen, or were
yeah.
you finding, or did you, when you realized that or thought of or committed to, I want to get this to product, I want to get this to shelves, I want to get this to dispensary, did you have to look for a commercialized kitchen that would allow you to do this R&D? How did you get into that? Did you start with your personal
I
kitchen, or
did
did you
my
go to,
own, did
you did it at
definitely
home? So you did all the R&D at home, and
all
then
the
when
R&Ds.
you perfected that, you took that somewhere, or did you
Yeah.
scale that up? Tell me about that. Talk
When
about
I perfected it, yeah, I took it somewhere. I took it a couple of places. I took it a couple of places. I took it again in my early moments, I took it to Humboldt where I had access to everything and I was able to produce things on scale. And that was, I feel like, my early moments of scaling, right? I was making my own keef. I was like using all of the biomass from these big halls of trimming moments up there in the mountains. And I had a kitchen that I was able to order. I just ordered tons of shit too, and I would ship all of these things to myself. And I had packaging and everything. And so that was like my early moments. But when I got the chance to work in a real kitchen, a commercial kitchen, I was able to apply these things. I went to culinary school for with the intention of cannabis specifically. Like anyone in my class will tell you that is that's I paid for that. Like it was very intentional. So it was like I knew I needed to do these things to move to this next thing. And yeah, it was always the intention of having a product or creating products for others. That was always the intention. It was always like, how do I get to the next place and creating something that's sustainable, right?
wow.
And
Wow.
has a life and has a personality. And like that's the goal in the end, right? I think for most brands and anybody, it's creating something that that fuels your passion, right? And being able to find processes and things that make it easy along the way for yourself and your consumer, right?
Right.
And making things accessible and um, having that engagement. I feel like that's the other part is just being able to answer questions about your products directly and being able to engage with your consumer. It goes a long way. So, yeah. So once you get to a place where you're like, okay, I have this kitchen space, like I had a 150,000 square foot kitchen in Massachusetts. And like once you get everyone on board and on like your team and things are being being made, it left a lot of time for me to do R&D and shelf life tests and you know. So yeah, it's like it's how you use your time and that's I feel like you see a lot of I feel like Massachusetts is a great market when it comes to seeing like what it can be. You see a lot of innovative products and that's really the way of when it comes to cannabis specific, it's your packaging. Is it innovative? Is it a single use moment? I feel like that is the way. Like you don't want products that have large volume. You want them to turn over quickly, right? You don't want someone
Yeah.
holding on to a product like, oh, I've had this in my pantry for 6 months, right? So you have to consider all of those things when you're bringing something to market, right? And there's a lot of stuff that fails or that has a short lifespan. And I think that has a lot to do with educating your consumer and how like how hard you're pushing it and
Right.
you,
They
you
need to know the blood, sweat, and tears that you put in to make this
know,
come to
passion.
life, you know?
Yes.
I'm glad that you brought up, so, if I'm hearing this correctly, when you were really serious about, taking this to a regulated market and creating something, you invested in yourself and you invested in your education so that you could apply that you were serious and committed to this because that's what you felt like was the best thing for you. And so you went to culinary school and just for the audience, thank you. Continue to ask your questions in the Zoom chat and or the Q&A box and we will get to them. But there is a question um, about what culinary school did you attend?
I went to the Institute of Culinary Education in well, it's in Battery Park now, but it was in Chelsea. Um, Yeah, and I was very vocal. Chef Miguel Trinidad is one of my alums. So if you guys know 99th floor, like that's my man, and he is like kind of like right on par with that. It was a great person to have in my court. So yeah, and it was like an interesting conversation because I was very vocal about it. Like we would have your Christina Tosis of Milk Bar that you would get to have these conversations with people in spaces that understand manufacturing, they understand um making shelf stable products. They understand that, yes, it's going to take away from different flavors that it would, where it would taste how you would make it home. It's like in a kind of, you're finding that balance. But having those conversations with people that have skin in the game in a regular space outside of cannabis and like being able to align and find people that believe in that cannabis moment outside of um I feel like just finding that synergy. So I like chefs, my chef, my mentor, Eduardo Jordan, like that was always my conversation. It's like, chef, I know you don't understand the plant. I was like, but when you're making products for the shelf, like what happens when if you want to make that synergy, have a product that is living in a cannabis space and can live in a grocery store at the same time. And I believe that that's the way the world will look at some point.
You were ahead of your curve. You were ahead of the curve. You were on the frontier. And if I remember correctly, Massachusetts was the first state on the East Coast to legalize back in 2014, I believe, correct? And so you had some insight, and that's why we appreciate you talking to us, especially for our New Jersey residents, because you do come from the future. Not only are you familiar with Washington, which legalized before New Jersey, you also come from the first East Coast market to legalize for adult use Massachusetts too. So thank you for bringing that future. This is why we do this, y'all. We bring people from the future to drop
Yeah.
gems and knowledge so that if you are thinking about going from legacy to legal, from your edibles to the shelves of dispensaries, this is something that you have to do. So appreciate you. And I hope that answered your question. And again, if you have any questions that come up while we're talking with Chef Alexis, please let us know. Drop it in this Zoom chat or the Q&A box and we'll get it in just a second. I just want to shout out a quick comment that we got from Ray Thomas. Learning how to get a consistent dosing throughout the product is crucial. Chef Alexis, can you just extrapolate on the importance of that? And what are some tips and tricks that you learned along the way to try to get to that consistency? And we can talk about tips and tricks before you got into a commercial facility where you had a little bit more technology and manufacturing to help you there. How did you do that from the home kitchen? How do you, because I've tried a little bit. Let me try. I've tried a little bit, and my consistency from one gummy to the other is not always the best. So, can you drop some knowledge on how we may be
I
able to
would
think about
overmix. I
consistency?
would overmix. I would like,
Oh, me. Okay, there we
it's
go.
like I knew that like homogenization was my key to, I knew that to consistency. Now, like I said, dosing, oh, it might have been like, my early moments. It was definitely, we were taking cats down, I was taking cats down. It was one of those things. But as I understood dosing and how concentrates worked and it was a learning curve, but I feel like once I was able to have people to kind of ask questions, especially when I got to the adult rec market, I'm grateful. Someone gave me an opportunity to learn everything on their time and on their dime. And it was an opportunity that I definitely encourage people to, to seek those moments out because you do get to learn a lot. And he gave me the ability to to test and do anything I wanted. And so you gotta, finding people that believe in you and want to see you succeed in those moments. And they know and knowing that you can move on at any given time, and
Right.
I found a lot of ingredients and people and suppliers and things that made my life easier and learning, like taking those things into account too. Like there's different ways of getting to your final product, and that's something that you have to take into account in the adult rec and scaling moment. It's like not the same. Your recipe, your recipe at home is your recipe at home. And you don't just say, hey, I'm gonna triple this recipe and it's gonna be the same. Because it isn't.
Especially if you're going savory too. I feel like gummies, it's a little bit of maybe an easier process with less ingredients. But if you're talking about savory, and we're going to talk about this in a second, because I know you sell ghee, coconut oil, and duck fat. So this is gonna be the next question. But my goodness, chef, questions are blowing up right now. So I'm going to try to get through our questions because there's so many good questions being dropped.
Okay, keep
So
on coming.
if you have questions in the Zoom chat, please drop them. If you have them in the Q&A, please drop them. We were going to try to get to. So Chef Alexis, can you talk about the different kinds of infused products that are available to people in Massachusetts, the ones that you make too, and how are they tested? And how can consumers determine the difference in qualities? And like I mentioned, you sell ghee, coconut oil, duck fat. How do consumers understand and know the difference? And you mentioned distillate versus rosin. What are these different infused products? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So distillate is cannabis that's been stripped of all of the other components. It's just the THC, right? So it's missing your other cannabinoids and your flavor profiles and They give it the full, give you the full entourage of the plant. It's a
So it's
strip.
very narrow. Distillate's very narrow. What you see is what you get, and you don't get the whole homies with it. Okay.
You don't get the rest of the homies. You don't get the, what you call them, the terpene. What's the all right. Yeah. So you don't get the homies. They don't come along, and you're just getting straight THC. And some people, and then this is the other part, I feel like some people are very like specific about keeping strain specific things together. And then you have other people that just it's a mixed bag. So you're getting multiple strains. And I do, me personally, and this is just me personally, but I feel I can tell if it's strain specific, even if it's distillate, by how racy or, how mixy it is, even if it's been stripped of these things. Like, as much as you can strip, I feel like there's only so much stripping. There's
Mm.
still little indicators. Now, when you have a full spectrum or a rosin or resin or solventless, you're getting the full spectrum of the plant. So you're getting the plant and all its properties that are healing and that, help the whole body versus it targeting like a euphoric or a high. And then yeah, it gets even, and then products, you have like it runs the gamut, I feel like in um mass. You have your anywhere for your topicals to boxed
Don't you have seltzers? Don't you have drinkables up there
lots
too?
and lots and lots of seltzers.
That's
Too
coming to Jersey at some point. Some point.
many
Some point.
beverages. Yeah, there's lots and like though I feel like Mass was one of the first places that I saw the abundance of seltzers. Like it was like, okay, it was a lot of seltzer.
And do they all go through same testing process and protocols? Is it
Mhm.
the regulations are the same that if you're creating a batch of gummies versus a seltzer, what's the testing like in Massachusetts? Because for Jersey,
Um,
you're going to have to go through testing too. You're going to still have to be able to test your products. And there's a question around tasting and all that. We'll get into a second. But can you talk about the testing protocol? How do you prepare for that? How do you make sure that your product is ready for testing before it even hits shelves?
so in Mass, we got to pull our own samples, and I think it varies from state to state. Um, but I would pull samples of each of my SKUs, what would be considered a full unit. So if I had a finished gummy was 20 pieces, that's what was in here. They would take it and they would essentially dissolve the entire gummy. And then they would test it and it would come back. So they would pick it up. I would have to enter everything into metric. It would deduct from my quantity I had made, and that was my test sample. And I would wait for that to come back. And once I received that it had cleared, and like it meant that variance. And I feel like Mass might have a more stringent variance. I don't know what New Jersey's is, but it's like 5%. Believe New York's is like 15 or
We
something.
just came out as of today of March 5th, 2025. For those that are listening in the future, we just came out with lab testing guidance from the CRC. So there's actually going to be a new wave of new testing protocols that's about to hit the market here in Jersey.
Yeah.
Things are about to get interesting.
Oh, that's gonna be awesome. Yeah. So that was always very interesting for me. I think that I learned that was a learning curve. And then once I got past it, it was like, okay, I get it. And it was integral in dosing as well, just understanding, percentages. And my math wasn't the greatest, so I'm very much a write it down. I write it down.
Paper napkin math. I think this is
I
right.
have a
Carry over the three.
calculator.
Yeah,
I have
sure.
a calculator for everything, every formulation. I am able to punch it in.
Numbers matter.
Yes, and
Numbers are the truth, right?
yep, and I have, you've got those people that are really good at those things. I was like, well, I just need it so I can plug it in. And so I've made calculators for myself that make it very easy to formulate. And so that was something that took some time to to learn for sure.
Are you saying that you might have had to learn the hard way to better your product? Did you have some times where you're like, oh, snap, I have to go back to the drawing board because this did
Mhm.
not pass where I needed it to pass?
Yep, I've had that. Absolutely. Mm.
So, to that question, SOPs, standards, you're trying to figure out procedures, protocols. How did you develop good SOPs to create consistent quality product that will deliver the same experience to consumer? And this is connected to also a question that we got from one of our students who's at the top of her game, really far in the CTA program. I'm well aware of her name, Janet Clark.
And
How can you, with SOPs, with good SOPs that create good quality, how can you tell that that product tasted what you tasted is what the customer gets? So talk about SOPs. How do you create good SOPs to create consistency? And then how can you tell that the product that you tasted is what the consumer gets?
those formula calculators are your best friend. They it's a creating a standard that that anyone could come in and read behind you and follow each step precisely. I am very like I'm very much I would film each step as I went. And then I was able to go back and write them, right? And then I would have another person put eyes on it and be like, all right. And it was various revisions, right? Until it was, but understanding the work instructions and just the steps, and then being able to put that in like write those compliantly, like each step, gloving up, like washing your hands, like putting on your, it's like, it's they're very precise.
Meticulous. You're talking about meticulous,
Yes, it's not
line by line, how many steps you get to that kitchen, what you open
about
up, where everything is on, like you're talking meticulous SOPs here.
absolutely. And then just, and it's a checks and balances moment. It's having someone to constantly verify, right? Like you're handling cannabis that you have to trace, right? You see a deduction, you have a liter of distillate. You need to know we need to keep track of the waste. And there's like it's a way of checks and balances. It's like, hey, you have another set of eyes. You're like, hey, I'm putting 21 grams of distillate into this batch of this. You have a form that is like, hey, I saw this, XYZ verified it. It's just a way of staying compliant as well. Um, and it can be, it can be a little overwhelming at first, but then once you understand it, it's a breeze.
Yeah, you have to do it. You have to create it. You have to fumble a little bit, but
A lot of fumbling.
once you hone in on it, it becomes second nature. And
Right.
I'm glad that you mentioned about bringing other people to follow those repetitive steps. To see, we're going to talk about partners and supporters and all that in just a second. So we're gonna hold on that for a second. But listen, chef, you can have the best gummy, the best seltzer, the best savory infused product in the world, but it doesn't mean anything if people don't know who you are or where it is or how to get exposed to it. So can you talk about branding and marketing? How is marketing and branding different operating in the legacy market versus operating in the regulated market? How do you get your name out there? How do you bring more exposure to yourself and your products to drive sales? Can you talk about that?
I mean, marketing in the legacy market is word of mouth, right? It's a community of the community of people that like that you've shared and they're like, hey, have you tried this? Or, using the folks in your circle to like, hey, or doing events. Like I think it's different, and then it's still it's storytelling. I think that's just part of our like culturally, like that's just what we do. We tell stories, right? And it's a part of our nature. And so it's when it comes to crossing over, it's telling your story and having like creating an identity and being able to discern your product from the other and being able to communicate directly with your consumer base and understanding what that algorithm is and like just being able to constantly feed that, right? Because I think this it's like it's very similar to the like music industry, whether it's or it's products or whatever you like, whatever it is that you're selling. We all have a customer base, and if you can tap in and find your customer and your consumer and speak to them, you have a you have a customer for life. And it's finding that, and I think it's just like understanding who you are and where you fit in the market. And there's a lot of companies and a lot of things where you see a lot of similarities. And it's like, yep, this is where I start, but knowing that, hey, this is going to evolve, right? So it's like, what's your plan for this next phase as this market evolves? It's like having your ideas and those things and just kind of just staying tapped into like the pulse of the market, the pulse of your community, the pulse of your customer, and like interacting and asking what it is that they want, you know?
It's
And
almost like you got to be omnipotent in a sense. Like with so many things, you have to be so aware.
Mhm.
And it's never, like you mentioned, it's never stagnant. The rules and regulations are changing too around advertising and marketing. These are things that I'm sure are part of your business plan that you are probably constantly tweaking so that you can stay up to date. Is that correct? Because I'm sure the
They
regulations
ever,
are a little bit
ever
restrictive up in Massachusetts, huh?
the ever changing, yeah, it's an ever changing game. And I feel like that's what it's gonna be. I feel, everyone's trying to figure it out and how it works in their space. Um, and what works in one place and everyone's figuring out like how that to navigate that and what it looks like for you. And yeah, it's an interesting game, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes.
It keeps
We
me on
got three
the
questions left, but we have a couple audience questions, so we're gonna get through these last three, and then we'll get to the audience questions because there's a
go.
couple goodies here that I think you would enjoy. So, what are some major hurdles and barriers you faced getting into the regulated cannabis industry? After you talk about the hurdles and barriers that you faced, is there anything different that you would have done with the knowledge that you have now before you started this journey?
Say like barriers, access. I think I think there's a lot more programs that give you access to, I guess, things like this, like having somebody that you like a mentor, or someone that you have questions about dosing and you're like, I have no idea, and you're trying to figure out how to do it online. This is like in the early days. Um, yeah, it's just access was I feel like the biggest hurdle. I you know thought culinary school was in culinary school was a huge like a huge important part of my trajectory. Like I said, I do believe in writing that line of culinary and cannabis, and it not being I'm a cannabis chef or I'm this. It's like merging these worlds together where you're able to teach a chef like a Chuck Good or someone about how these plants interact with each other and how they can apply it to their cooking and how their customer would appreciate it. I think it's an education. And I just think that like there's just I think a lack of there's been a lack of that. And so I've just you seek it out like and it's like the circles of people that you put you're around. Like I align myself with chefs and like in folks that we understand food ways, and that's a discussion like in amongst my peers. Um and how do you and I apply that to cannabis. It's like me, it's like a merging of those worlds and the intentionalness of trying of that intersectionality. And I think it's coming. But there's that. And then money, right? Another barrier. Money.
I'll
Yeah.
make it rain. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's like that. People understanding like I think there's a big disconnect with the savory. People thinking that there's like, oh, it's gummies, it's these things, and there's a whole nother. So I just think it's education, and there's something for everybody in this, and it's finding that thing that it is
Right.
that you do and that you are passionate about, and that you can go and like you can go speak your heart out about, and it shows, right? I think that's
Something
where
that gets you out of bed, something that gets you out of bed. Now
and
we know
like our
that this
legacy.
journey,
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
go for it, go for it.
I was gonna say, as a like as someone coming like that came from this legacy space, and like I love it with all my heart. It's like that's the goal, right? And to have something that lives, that has staying power, that has a life and an identity, and it's a part of you. And I think that's really the goal, right? And um, legacy operators and brands, I feel like they do that very well. Like it's it is a very nichey thing that you do, right? Like there's these dudes, they do is it BK broilers, they do these caramels. And they do these great hash caramels, right? I go to this spot in New York, and I get some of the dopest products. And there's this chick Sola Tea. She does these great teas. So it's like those products and the intentionality of them those are that's what carries the industry. And just like dialing in and being like, you know, just being very like specific and intentional about that thing that you're making and loving it, even if it is something as small as a caramel, like whatever it is, just put your all into it, and you got,
Absolutely.
you know.
And this isn't a one person journey. You're going to need supporters along the way. You're going to need partners along the way, outside of
Mm.
investors, obviously, but you're going to need some partners. Can you talk about, for the legacy operators or the people that are thinking about getting into the edible space, what types of uh, partners are you going to have? What can you talk about your dream team of setting up a team of people to get you to where you need to go? Who's in
Like
your corner? Who do you need in your corner?
I feel like it's an ecosystem. It doesn't. I don't know if it's just one. It's cultivators. It's extractors. It's literally it's dispensary owners. It is an ecosystem. It's people that understand compliance. There's people that understand different aspects of law. Um, it's not a one, yeah. And it's not a small team, you know. That's what I've learned that. It's like it takes a lot. It's not one person, you're not gonna get that far.
And you'll learn, for those that are listening, it's in the Cannabis Training Academy, you'll learn about finding the right teams and vetting people and vetting vendors and contractors and partners and determining who you bring on along the way of your journey. And it's a lot, there
It's
are certainly
overwhelming.
people
And
overwhelming, and it's managing relationships too. So we'll both,
And those are so important. Yep.
right.
Those are the most important things are your relationships. And
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's the
and I think
relationships.
the other part of it, I think, is like when you are creating products for other people, making you're creating something that someone loves. And this is your like, and I feel like there's a lot of manufacturers that skip steps when it comes to making things for other people.
Oh, how so? How so? Tell me.
You will see. When you're an asset, let's just say as someone that would you would call asset light, right? It's like I feel like a lot of manufacturers aren't like they don't have a lot of integrity. They in like, oh, I'm making this thing and it's a dollar. It's a dollar, right? But when something lives on a shelf as a brand, it's like you want your customer to have to step forth with pride and to be really proud of this product and it to taste the way it tasted when X manufacturer made it, but they weren't able to keep up with they couldn't keep up with your forecasting because you were growing so fast. I just feel like there's a lot of shortcuts that people take to cut costs, and if you're not directly involved in your day-to-day with where you see a lot of businesses being asset light and just having brands and don't understand the process, you get a subpar product, right? And so when you're making these goods, it's like the approach is like the same way that you're serving someone food at your dinner table. Like that's the approach, right? And
Right.
I feel like that doesn't necessarily happen everywhere. Not to say not to say that not to say that it's like prevalent, but I do feel like there's a lot of shortcuts and, you know,
Well, I feel like if you
having
take shortcuts, you lose
standards.
integrity. I feel
Yeah,
like
having a standard.
if you take shortcuts, you lose integrity. If you take shortcuts, you're wavering in your principles, especially when you start out thinking that this is what I want to do. If you take shortcuts, you are shorting yourself, and that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibes right there. Mine too.
So we're gonna get to audience questions. Chef Alexis, thank you again for your time. We're gonna get to audience questions now to wrap it up. Again, if you have your last minute questions, ask them now in the chat. I'll try to get to them. But let's start real quick. The question about dosing, and consistency. When creating edibles, this is from Samantha Scott. When creating edibles, how much does the THC level of the flower you use matter as far as the dosing?
Oh, it absolutely matters. Like, I guess like I would approximate if I got weed, just got a bag of flour from XYZ off the street and I didn't have like THC percentages. I guess early in the like back in the day, I would have just averaged, been like, all right, this is probably 14, 15%. But now it's a lot, you have higher THC content. So it does matter. It does matter. And it matters how you extract it. Like if you're decarbing, if you're not decarbing, if you're decarbing at a really high temperature, if you're decarbing old weed, it's like all of these different, you get these different effects. Some of them get really sleepy. It all depends. But I feel like, there's a lot of great resources now online that kind of help you create a formula.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up decarboxylation because listen, if that cannabis flower has been sitting and oxidizing, that THC percentage, that CBN conversion is going to be different compared to if you're harvesting and getting it from a cultivator the day of. That's going to be a completely different potency and quality than something that has been sitting and oxidizing for a couple of weeks or so. So thank you for that. Another question. What do you see as the future with cannabis and food? Do you see cannabis cuisine as the next big wave, as we are seeing with cannabis drinks, which are all the rage right now?
I think in the right market, absolutely. I feel like in a marketplace like New York, which I feel like is essentially like in Amsterdam, it's your food, it's the food, it's a mecca, it's the food mecca of the world and I feel like there, yes, I think that it will definitely be the catalyst for everybody else to kind of jump on board. And it's been part of that scene for a long time. So yeah, I definitely see food and experiences really, right? It's sensory and dining experiences. Um, and it's gonna take some compliant moments to really get it dialed in. But I do think like products like fats and lipids and different quote condiments or things of where you can dress things, it'll allow that are tested, I guess per se. It would allow for some sort of compliance in that space. I'm
Right.
excited to see what it looks like. Like I said, I'm looking forward to, I'm looking forward to going to Tatiana and like Kwame having a version of his suya like infused on the menu. Like though
Oh,
that's where I see like the future of cannabis and dining. And Like you see it happening. You see these different chefs that are incorporating it somehow into their food. I went to a really cool event like last September at Hall of Flowers, and it was like Chris Constantino and Sonoma something. But he did this whole infusion, and it was like no THC, but it was just like him using flavors from, the terpenes and incorporating them to ice cream. But it's just like you see where it's going, and it has a lot of potential. Definitely has a lot of potential. And I just feel like when the right person does it, it's it's gonna be received well.
And I found that Top Chef Masters winner Chef Chris Cosentino did that Hall Flower surprise weed line with famed farm.
Yeah, it was
Yes,
dope.
in Santa Rosa, uh, new spicy arugula pre-rolls from Sonoma Hills Farm.
Yeah, he had dope. He had like infused infused salts, and he had all this like these lines that it was just you could see the
I
way.
make infused sugar. That's fun.
Yeah,
That's
and
really
see,
fun.
like, like I think that's the wave. I feel like that will be it. Like, not everyone wants to smoke. I do enjoy, inhaling some some good
I
cheap.
love my Duchess. I'll be frank.
I I love it when someone will roll me something and put a little, Fanta. Like I'm all for it. Um, but I just know that it's not necessarily
Not
the
for everybody.
yeah.
Chef Alexis, last two questions. And thank you again for your time. What does your day-to-day look like? How many people are in your operation or touching your product or touching your SOPs in your business plan? Like how many people are involved in your day-to-day activities now that you're operating at such a high level? No pun
There's a little everyone got their hand in a little everything. Well, those SOPs are constantly evolving or changing. Your processes change, so you have to kind of gotta edit those as those processes change. And as you find you know, your little moments where you're like, okay, I'm having a moment here where I'm not able to produce your little labor holes of, and you're like, okay, this is now if I implement this process, and even just all the way down to different equipment, it changes
We
your
didn't
life.
even get to the equipment question. We didn't even get to the equipment
Oh
question.
my God, that's like the game changer. Let me tell you, flood and scrape, when you start making gummies and you don't have a depositor, it makes you want to make a shit ton of gummies so that you can afford that first depositor. And once you're making so many gummies, and then you're like, okay, I can't keep up with the packaging. There's just like all these just different moments where you're like, okay, what's slowing me down here? And now I need to get here. And it's like once I make this amount of packets here, it's gonna pay for this this packaging machine or this counter that's gonna help increase my output. Those are the beauties of growth, I guess. And so you look forward to those small little, steps to get you to the
Small
next.
steps turning into big steps. Now,
Mm.
ultimately, last question, Chef. Ultimately, do you think it was worth it and are you happy with the decision to go from legacy into the regulated market? And if for those that are listening, for those that are still in the legacy operations in the legacy market, for those that are considering transitioning, what would be the top three considerations before they even decide to make that move? So the first question again is, are you happy with making that transition? Do you think that was a positive transition from legacy to the regulated market? And for those that are thinking about doing the same thing, what are kind of three top things that they should consider before they make that transition?
Yeah, I'm happy with my decision to to kind of to make that transition. Um, I'm, I think that was my goal. That was the goal. I was like, how do I make this a sustainable thing? And it's just like understanding your why, I think that's that's a big part of it. Um, what else? I'm trying to think. yeah, your why, your who, for how long, and like, where does it go? Like, what's your growth look like? And do you plan on doing this in other places? Like, I guess it's just like, how do you grow and what's your expansion look like? And that's for, at least for me, and having the right people on my team and and people that I can ask questions that when I don't know things. And I think that has been the biggest asset is my circle and people that make space for me and and I make, reciprocate that. And I think that's super, super important. Finding people that align with you, that share information, um, because it's a lot of information. And I think that it's having different people that have these different strengths, that have different understandings of things that you may not necessarily get. Um, and it's creating teams, I guess, like you would say, like the kind of, forming them like Voltron. You have these guy that has this strength here, and you have this person that has this strength here, and you're able to utilize all of those, and you get to hone in on that thing that you're really good at. And that is the best part of having a team, because there's a part when that legacy space where you're doing it all by yourself, and you have people that are supportive of you, and they want to see you get to whatever that next thing is. But then when you come over here, it's a whole nother plethora of information and compliance and doing it right. Like, did I make a mistake making this agreement? And I think it's just the more you know and the more that you can learn from other people's mistakes is like uh fucking game changer. It's let me tell you. Let me tell you. And having patience, I think the that's the biggest part is not rushing decisions and know that things are gonna happen when they're supposed to, and using those moments when you're waiting to hear about a license or whatever those
A
things
long game. It's a long game.
to to use that time accordingly to like plan and to tap into your resources and get an idea of like and ask all the questions that you can. It's like no question is a dumb question. And yeah, I think your circles are your key. And I've met some really great people like on both sides, on my legacy side and on my on this adult rec side. And I don't think I would change any of the trajectory that I've had, and all the ups and the downs. Like they make you who you are, right?
Chef Alexis Garrison, truly appreciate your time. Truly appreciate you answering our audience questions and dropping some gems for everybody here. Thank you again for your time. Wishing you much ongoing success in everything that you've been doing up in Massachusetts. Hope to see you down in the Garden State at some point. Hopefully, to bring you down at some point would be great. I will actually be up in Necan, Boston in mid-March. So
We're gonna miss each other.
yeah. Oh no, I'm gonna miss you. No. But anyway, so thank you everybody. This Legacy to Legal conversation will be saved. It will be uploaded to the Cannabis Training Academy portal. It will also be uploaded to the Cannabis Training Academy YouTube account. And it will also be on the Cannabis Training Academy CTA.NJ.GOV digital site so that you can click on it, gets you to the YouTube video, and you can share it and circulate it as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. We hope that you learned a whole lot. I certainly learned a whole lot from Chef Alexis. Again, Chef Alexis, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And everybody else, have a wonderful night. Have a wonderful week. Have a good weekend. And class is dismissed. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Take care. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Chef.